Hi, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed the panel and the morning's content. And I just can't believe we're already at our final session for this morning. And it's my pleasure and honor to introduce this spotlight talk by Paul Shoemaker, Rebuilders and Their Impact on Giving, based on his new book. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Beth. Great to be here with you and great to be here with everybody. So if everybody would, for just 1 minute with me, picture a mountain. So for the second half of the 20th century, for about 50 years, America was slowly, unevenly, but surely sort of making progress up this long, steep mountain. For the last 25 years, we've been going the other direction, back down that mountain. 2020 was like falling down a steep hillside. That mountain and its apex is economic, social, and health equity in America. And climbing back up that mountain, that is the leadership challenge for the decade ahead. So this is a crowd. If I talked about the scope and the scale of inequities today, folks would know about it. But I will say for myself, when I've done my research, the pace and the downward path of inequities in America over the last 25 years is alarming. Just quickly, economically, we all know about the wealth divide. We have finally reached a point in America where the wealth of 3 million people is greater than the wealth of 300 million other Americans. The education gap, which we spent 30 years sort of slowly closing, then it kind of stalled for 10, 15 years. And of course, in 2020, we know that gap widened significantly. We just don't know how much yet. And on health, we've expanded the quantity of health. When it comes to the quality, the access to the quality of health, you can live 6 miles apart in 2 different zip codes in Seattle, Washington, and your life expectancy can be 20 years apart. So this 25-year trajectory, this downward path and the pace of it, makes to me urgently clear that reversing and addressing inequity is the most significant challenge for leaders in the decade ahead. And this is important. We read about the problems. We read about the solutions. We read about new programs and innovation. To me, we don't read much about the kind of leaders and leadership that we need. And when you think leaders, don't just think nonprofit leaders, think giving leaders. We are all leaders in this equation. So here's the question for America and for each of us. What are the vital leadership traits we will uniquely need in the decade ahead for the most inequitable, complex America in nearly 100 years? So to answer that question, I took some time to sort of look at 3 questions, 3 qualitative questions. And I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher, I'm a 30-year cross-sector guy. So the 3 questions I tried to look at were leaders. I talked to nearly 100 of the best leaders I knew to sort of learn what attributes and traits define them. The second thing I looked at was impact. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't just talking to leaders, but I also wanted leaders that were making impact and reversing that trend of inequity that's been happening the last 25 years. And finally, context. Complexity is the context for leadership in the decade ahead. What an amazingly complex decade. We have the most divided, siloed America we've had in who knows how long. Media and technology make it hard to even have a set of shared facts to argue about. The public, private, and nonprofit sectors, they're blurring together. It's opportunity, it's also complexity. We have this range of problems and challenges: cybersecurity, homelessness, climate, geopolitical, on and on, that are generational, historic, and they're truly at inflection points. So again, I'm trying to hack the question, what are the vital leadership traits we will uniquely need in the decade ahead for the most inequitable, complex America in nearly 100 years? So I want to share 4 slides with you guys to sort of visually ground us. This one should look familiar. This is just sort of a reiteration of what I said a minute ago. This was the research, the qualitative research that I did. I looked for great leaders and their traits and qualities. I looked for places where true social impact was happening, what traits were making a difference. And that last circle, the complexities of the decade ahead, what kinds of traits and qualities are we going to need out of leaders to be able to meet this crazy decade coming at us. And that scribble in the middle, those were the 5 vital traits that dropped out that are the most important. So next slide. These are those 5 traits. So clearly in 10 minutes, we don't have a time to talk about every one of them. I'm going to spotlight one of them. I've done 21 talks across the country in the last 2 months. So we would have dove into these much more with you in that context. And if you're in the breakout room with we can talk about them in more depth. But those 5 traits are a generosity mindset, which we'll talk about in just a minute, 24/7 authenticity, data conviction, capacity for complexity, and cross-sector fluency. Next slide. And the person we're going to talk about in just a minute, this is Roseanne Haggerty. She is the CEO of Community Solutions. Next slide. And if you would, just hang on to this picture of a bridge for just a minute, because I'm going to come back to it in just a second. So we can take the slides down. So when I talk about Roseanne, one of those complexities I talked about is how do we lead in a divided, deeply divided, siloed America? And this is a question that is every bit as relevant to philanthropic and giving leaders as it is to nonprofit social sector leaders. The trait that is best tuned to meet that complexity is what I call generosity mindset. The person I first heard this from was Roseanne Haggerty. She was walking down the streets of New York City a couple of years ago, and we were talking about how does she go into communities on such a complex, contentious issue to try to make progress. Reflexively, she said, I have to go in with a generosity mindset. This is a person that spent her entire career working in homelessness. In her senior year of college, the apartment building next to hers in New York City was called Homeless Hell. She's given her life to it. So a generosity mindset is a strategic focus on the ultimate goal. It's about moving past all diversions. It's getting the best from everyone. It's making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. That sounds a lot easier than it is, particularly today. Generosity mindset leaders, they are masters of trust. I can't think of a more scarce, important natural resource today than trust. And think about how leaders in the philanthropic and giving sector, how you can be carriers, holders, stewards of trust. And just to be clear, generosity mindset is not just about sort of being nice. It's actually a very hard-edged, intentional strategy that comes from a mindset of strength. And of these 5 traits, it's the most obvious one when it's missing from a team or a meeting or a community. Community Solutions has ended chronic or veteran homelessness in 14 cities. They have reduced the incidence of it in dozens more. That's called walking the talk, and that's called true social impact. We can accept the world as it is, or we can find and we can build up more leaders like Roseanne Haggerty. She is a nonprofit leader. So it's even harder for her to walk into a situation with a generosity mindset. So we as giving leaders, we can either A, invest more in people like her, or B, we can become those kinds of leaders. It's absolutely a role that giving can play. And I would contrast how we played 2008 with 2020. The philanthropic sector, the giving sector showed up with so much more of a generosity mindset. So if I was going to leave you with one thought today, it would be, don't just reimagine how we give, reimagine how we lead. Don't just reimagine how we give, reimagine how each of us can lead. So a last thought, back to that picture from just a minute ago with the bridge. That's a tunnel underneath a bridge that runs through Snell Crawford Park in Fort Dodge, Iowa, where I grew up. I used to go down there for summers and just sit underneath that bridge because I love to hear the cars go rumbling over. And in that picture, that was my dad and my brother walking down that creek bed. I've always been fascinated by bridges. My C in physics, my freshman year of college said I'm not going to be an engineer of them, but I still love them. Every bridge from the Golden Gate to Snell Crawford Park has 3 parts to it: a foundation, a substructure, and a superstructure. Bridges and civil society in America are only as strong as their underlying foundations. 2/3 of the bridges in America were built between 1950 and 2000. Now those same bridges are in need of repair. 8% of them are in need of urgent rebuilding. The state of bridges is very evocative of the state of our civil society. That is why I call these leaders rebuilders. We have a fundamentally different America than we did 25 years ago. We need rebuilders for our bridges, for our communities, and our companies. Last thought, massive upheavals like 2020 can be times for undoing and expelling old ways of thinking and being and doing. This is where these rebuilders come in. Leadership is the seminal lever in civil society in times like this. Those leaders that show up with the 5 vital traits will not only be rebuilders for the decade ahead, to me, they will be genuine American heroes, people like Roseanne Haggerty and like each of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for those thoughts, and especially that point about not just reimagining giving, but also leadership. And having read your book, I hope others will pick it up and dive deep into those other 5 traits of leadership. So important. And so that's a wrap on our morning program. And just a reminder that our most of our speakers will be joining us in the networking lounge. And this is your chance to have those follow-up conversations with each other. And also the final giving circle starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, the same time. So we'll see you there and and throughout the rest of the day. And also our ending keynote with Chef Andre is coming up after that, as well as the site visit and the final learning culmination. So thank you.